My first ever corporate internship was as a software engineer at Amazon. Getting that first foot in the door is often the hardest part of the entire journey. When I landed Amazon as a sophomore in college, I was still navigating the entire process that was tech intern recruiting. It was a super nerve-wracking experience because I knew this offer could literally change my life. In this video, I'm going to provide a complete roadmap of the timeline, networking and referrals, the OA, the final round interview, and then the offer and details about the offer. Before we dive into the how, I actually want to talk about the when. My timeline at Amazon was actually super long, which was nothing like my experience applying for Meta. This is where most people lose hope when it comes to tech recruiting. I actually applied in early August. I thought I was super early to the application and that I'd hear back fairly soon. Then September passed, October passed. I still hadn't heard anything. I thought by this point I was definitely ghosted or rejected. Then November, December, and finally the end of January. That's when I first got the OA. If you've applied and haven't heard back, don't assume it's a no. Tech recruiting moves at a weird pace because departments have to finalize last year's headcount and project for next year's growth. About 2 weeks after I submitted the OA, I got the invitation for the final round interview, which I scheduled for the first week of March. I finally got my offer a few days after that. The key takeaway here is to make sure that you're ready for anything. Just because you think you may have been ghosted somewhere doesn't mean you actually are. The biggest hurdle in FANG recruiting isn't actually the coding, it's getting a human to look at your resume. Most people just spam 200 applications and hope for the best. But with these companies having a less than 1% acceptance rate for their internship programs, that's a losing game. To get my Amazon OA, I didn't just cold apply. I would go on LinkedIn and I would search for people who worked at Amazon and I would filter by my university. I wouldn't reach out to people who were VPs or senior execs. I'd reach out to software engineers who were just in my shoes 2-3 years ago because they remember the struggle of getting a job and it made them a lot more likely to respond and be helpful. Reaching out to alum is significantly better than reaching out to any random software engineer because the shared connection of a university tends to make them way more receptive to wanting to help. Once I found a few alumni, I would reach out to set up brief 15 to 30 minute coffee chats on Zoom. I'd say something like, hey, I'm a current student at X university and I see you've had an awesome career at Amazon. I'd love to reach out and learn more about your experience working there and the overall culture. The goal here is an informational interview. You want to learn more about their day-to-day, what the job is like, the overall culture, what the Amazon way of doing things really means. At the end of a call that I found productive, I'd ask, based on our conversation, do you think I'd be a good fit for the intern program? If so, would you be open to referring me? Most people are happy to help with referrals because they get a referral bonus if you end up being hired. This referral was a primary reason that my resume got past the ATS filters for the application, because at the time, my resume really didn't have any work experience on it, with just one prior internship at a small startup. When that OA finally hit my inbox in late January, I was super nervous because I had never done any assessment for a big tech company before. It was a roughly 60 to 70 minute assessment consisting of 2 technical questions and a 15-minute work style assessment. The work style questionnaire was a 15-minute long survey of sorts, where you pretty much just chose what options kind of fit you best. This could look like choosing between 1 or 2 options, or it could be like using a slider to see which end of a spectrum that you're more aligned with. For these, I'd recommend studying up on the Amazon leadership principles beforehand, since they outline the guidelines that they expect of employees and future employees. You can try and tailor your answers to these on the work style assessment, but be careful that you're staying consistent with your answers because the assessment likes to ask the same question over and over again to make sure that your answers are genuine. When I realized I wouldn't finish the optimized code in time, I didn't just leave it blank. I actually commented out the pseudocode and the overall logic and structure needed to pass those last 5 test cases. I also wrote down the time and space complexity that I was aiming for. I think that those comments definitely helped push me to the final round, as they explained that I actually understood the algorithmic pattern behind the question and what my solution was going for. Looking back, I probably would have written a brute force solution for question 2 first, and then worked on implementing optimizations one at a time later. And I think that might have given me at least 1 or 2 more test cases passed. I also probably would have looked back at question 1 and question 2 first before I wrote any lines of code so that I would know to rush more on question 1. The final stage was one 45-minute interview round. This round consisted of both technical and behavioral questions, which was different from my meta interview that was purely technical. The technical portion consisted of one LeetCode question, as well as a couple general tech questions. An example of a question that I was asked was what my favorite sorting algorithm was and how it worked. I actually answered BOGO sort to this, which I think is a pretty unorthodox answer, and I think that since it was so unique, my interviewer actually loved it, and it really made me stand out in my interview. Because I had used LeetCode Premium to study the Amazon tagged question bank ahead of time, I recognized my LeetCode problem on the interview immediately. It was longest substring without repeating characters. If you're serious about a specific company, I think the investment into LeetCode Premium is worth it simply for the frequency data alone. Knowing what questions could come up ahead of time makes an interview so much easier. The fact that I had seen longest substring without repeating characters before my Amazon interview made it so that I knew the optimal solution ahead of time, and I could focus on communicating my thoughts out loud and discussing trade-offs rather than having to solve the problem as well. Similar to my meta interview, you're coding in a blank document, not a working IDE, so you have to make sure to dry run your code and walk through it. For the behavioral, the most important thing is the Amazon leadership principles. Every answer that you give should be tied to these leadership principles. There were two questions I got that I specifically remember. The first one was, tell me about a time where you worked with someone who had a differing work style from you. The second question was, tell me about a time a teammate let you down. When answering these, I made sure to weave in the leadership principles. In my opinion, there are three I think that are the most important for interns. The first is ownership. I didn't just blame the teammate, I talked about how I stepped in to make sure that the project actually succeeded. The second is bias for action. In the differing work style question, I highlighted how I made a quick decision instead of overthinking it. This went against what the other intern on my team at my prior small internship thought, as he wanted to go through every single option thoroughly with our boss before he wrote any piece of code, which I thought was a huge waste of time for a small problem. I offered him a compromise. I said, let's spend 30 minutes trying to solve this problem, and if we can't solve it in that time, then we can loop in our manager. He agreed, and we actually ended up solving the problem in 20 minutes. Our manager praised us for being self-sufficient, and I tied this right back to bias for action because it showed how I made a reversible decision without overthinking or overcomplicating things. The third is customer obsession. I didn't personally reference customer obsession in any of my behavioral answers, but it's obviously super important and could come up depending on the question, so it's definitely something to keep in mind. 2 days after that 45-minute round, I got the call. I still remember that moment. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment, wondering when I'd hear back. The offer was $54 an hour with a $3,500 per month housing stipend in Seattle. It hit me after that I would be moving across the country to a city I never even visited to work at one of the world's biggest tech companies. It was super exciting, but also super nerve-wracking at the same time. I ended up getting the return offer after a successful summer working on an internal tooling platform team used by every other team at AWS. If you're currently struggling with the recruiting process and feel like it's a black box, that's exactly why we started Landed HQ. We've helped over 30 students overcome these exact hurdles and walk them through the entire process, from networking to the offer. If you're interested, check out the link below in the description for more info. Getting into big tech is a marathon, not a sprint. Whether it's practicing patterns or networking with alumni, consistency is the only way through. In my next video, I'll be doing a deep dive into the resume I used to land this Amazon role and my other roles, so be sure to subscribe and like for more.